Hey folks, welcome to YouTube Live on Monday at 12 o'clock Mountain Time. We're going to be talking about the 13 steps to freedom again, a continuation from last week's webinar. And a little bit late today, coming in 4 minutes late. Just had to drop my mom off at the mechanics shop, and it's snowing like crazy out here in Calgary. And just before we get started, while people are signing in right now, I just want to talk a little bit about the snow. It's really interesting how we get so caught up emotionally in how much the snow really bugs us. You know, like yes, we're about a month behind on spring, and the snow just doesn't seem to disappear. But we have such short memories as humans. And one of the things that is really interesting to me about that is that we just came out of one of the driest periods in southern Alberta for a really long time. I think we personally had 10 millimeters of rain last year when we normally get about 320. And so now all that moisture seems to have accumulated over the winter. I mean, we had close to 3 feet of snow, or a meter for people calling in from Canada, which is, you know, roughly 300 centimeters, or about 300 millimeters. It turns out you can kind of convert the two. So 300 centimeters of snow is approximately 300 millimeters of rain. So we had almost the same amount of moisture that we typically receive through a spring here over the winter time. And so here's the situation that we find ourselves in right now, is that the ground is frozen. As we start to get thaw, a lot of that water is just going to get lost. It's just going to end up in the river. It's going to raise the river levels really high, and then we'll lose all of that moisture because there's nowhere for it to infiltrate. And so this is one of the reasons that I think that swales and large water harvesting earthworks in this ecosystem can make a lot of sense, because we can seasonally store that water. So perhaps for 1 or 2 months while the ground thaws. And then we've got access to that when we get into the summer months. And so because what we're trying to do in permaculture is to create systems that support human habitat that are mimicking natural patterns, you might wonder, well, what is a swale or a pond related to, or how is that an expression of a natural pattern from ecosystems? And so after looking at snowmelt all weekend, I couldn't help but think that over the last 150 years, we've actually degraded our ecosystem, and we've replaced these ecosystem services, or we actually haven't replaced them. We've taken them out of the system. The swale and pond pattern that would have existed here 150 years ago is the beaver. And we have this funny thing in our culture that I still struggle to wrap my head around, and I think it has to do with self-hate, but I'm not positive about that. It's just a theory of mine, that when a plant is not welcome, or when an animal is not welcome, and it starts to move into an ecosystem at very rapid pace, we call it invasive, especially if it's from somewhere else. And this is a really funny terminology that we have in our vernacular, our vocabulary. And if you applied that same thinking to the way that Europeans have come over to North America, I mean, we technically are actually the invasive species, if you believe in that whole idea. It's funny how we can apply that to animals and to plants, but the minute that we apply it to ourselves, it gets really personal, and we kind of don't want to talk about it anymore. The funny thing, though, with invasion biology is that it's lacking in scientific rigor. And what I mean by that is that the minute that we have a species on our farm or on our property that's acting with the same pattern as an invasive, if that species, plant or animal, is native, in other words, it's of this ecosystem or has been here for quite a while, then we can't call it invasive anymore because it's not from somewhere else. And so we just call it a vermin. And so it doesn't really matter whether it's invasive or not. Really, at the end of the day, our action towards it is entirely based around our emotions towards that animal. And so beavers are a great example of this. Farmers will look at, for not just farmers, municipalities as well. I'm not just trying to pick out on farmers here. It's humans that live in rural areas. Let's put it that way. Some of them being landowners, some of them being municipalities, look toward beavers as being vermin. So they're native, they're of here. They definitely do services, but the services that they provide are generally in direct contradiction to the way that we currently try and use land. And it's a very kind of single-minded view of land. And the removal of the beaver and the services that they provide actually lead to the droughts that we experience. And so we need to change how we look at plants and animals. And one of the most ironic things to me is that if you believe that we're actually experiencing climate change and that the world, global climate is changing as a result of human action, I think the other kind of whole ridiculous thing around this whole speciation thing, you know, whether something is invasive or native, is completely ridiculous, because if the planet is in fact changing at the rate that everybody claims that it is, does it not make sense that the species would also have to change in order to adapt to the new paradigm? And in fact, the desire to try and hold things static the way that they've been for the last 150 years might be exactly the wrong approach to managing ecosystems. So the thing that concerns me is this kind of very non-holistic approach to looking at what should and shouldn't be here, and generally not really addressing the problems at the root cause. We can generally just go after things from a symptomatic perspective. So next time you look out the window and you see all that snow falling down, if in fact you live in Alberta and you're having snow today, give it a thought and think about it from the perspective of the 33 or 50% of the moisture that this ecosystem receives, and what you can do to keep that moisture in place as long as possible to try and improve the resilience of the overall system. We tend to get very emotional about weather, and it doesn't really need to be that way. So Alan, I believe or agree with you. We need more beavers. They would solve so many problems. I absolutely agree with that. But in order for us to adopt beavers into the landscape, it means we need to change our land management approach. And so that's a really important kind of societal shift that we have to make. And anyways, I just wanted to start off with that. We're going to continue on with this program, but before we do, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. So we're headed off to Invermere this week. We're going to be teaching our permaculture design course out there for 4 days. It's weekend 3 out of the 4 weekends when we teach it on a part-time basis. We're teaching it at the Groundswell campus for sustainability, where we have the big passive solar greenhouse and the outdoor food forest. And so I won't be going live again this Wednesday, and I also will not be going live on Friday. We'll be back to a more similar schedule next week. So if you're on my newsletter, you'll get notified as to the shows that we're going to be doing. Lots of exciting stuff planned for the next few months, guys. We're going to have some people on the show talking about food forestry. We're going to be talking more about holistic livestock management. We're going to be talking about cold climate gardening. And how you can apply it to your ecosystem. And even if you don't live in a cold climate, you're still going to get value out of the cold climate gardening. We're going to be talking about some case studies in terms of how to take some of these concepts into reality. So lots and lots of really great info coming up in the next few weeks. So make sure you share it with your friends. Make sure you hit the like button, share this on social media. I'm really working hard this year to grow the channel, and I need your guys' help to make that happen. We're really going to be pushing hard on YouTube this year. The other thing that you might want to check out as well is I've been writing on Medium quite a bit actually lately, and just got given the Sustainability Author Award, or whatever that means. I think I basically have the most number of articles on sustainability on Medium right now or something. I'm not sure exactly how they classify that, but Lots of great info up there. So if you're on Medium, check me out, Rob Avis at Medium there. Yeah, lots of exciting stuff coming up. So just stay tuned, and I appreciate all the people that are regulars and that are showing up on a regular basis. It's been really great to kind of get to know you in the limited access I have to you through the chat window right now. Yeah, we're going to keep building this together. So thanks so much, guys. Okay, I'm just going to get my presentation going here, and then we will get into the content for today. So last time we talked about getting healthy and the importance of, really understanding your body chemistry. Now and we talked about actually how nature would have taken care of that body chemistry conversation for us. But as we took on more of the role of growing food so that we could harvest it when we wanted to and store it for long periods of time, we also took on the responsibility of understanding our body chemistry. And so I feel like the science is just starting to catch up to where we are with regards to our own body ecology, our own body chemistry. And so as gardeners, as farmers, as food connoisseurs, as people that are concerned about food, that responsibility rests on us. And I feel like we're on the cusp of a massive shift globally around diet. And I think this ties nicely into what we were talking about earlier around bringing the beavers back and, helping people to, or changing the way that we manage ecosystems. One of the comments that I made this morning, and it's actually one of the reasons that I try and write every day, is because it helps me to clarify my thoughts, is that if we want to live in a sustainable world, if we want to grow food systems, and I mean that, grow food, not just grow food, but grow food systems that are drought proof, then we actually have to grow food that is more resilient to drought. And that almost always leads you into the same direction, which is going to be toward perennial food systems that function on 100 or 300 or 1,000 years, as opposed to the next 4-month or 100-day growing season. I think that the fact that humanity has settled in on annual agriculture is terrifying. And I'm going to be writing about the existential crisis or threats that exist within our food system here in the next couple of weeks. I've got a couple of posts that are kind of fermenting in my head right now, and what we can do about it. I'm not just going to drop the threats on your lap. I'm going to talk about what the solutions might be, and how we can approach it both from a societal level, but also from an individual level as well. So we can, by increasing individual resilience, you inevitably end up making the whole system a little bit more resilient at the same time. So hopefully that all makes sense. So this is probably one of the most important things that you can do to start taking control of your life. And it's called building a holistic context. And this is an insight that Alan Savory had. Alan Savory is a biologist from South Africa, and he has a whole incredible system called holistic management. And he runs an organization called the Savory Institute. There's also another version of that he had co-founded earlier on, called Holistic Management International, HMI. And they kind of broke off and kind of started doing their own things. And so now Alan Savory runs the Savory Institute, and HMI runs the HMI Institute. And they're both doing great stuff. They both have really interesting information. And so it was through holistic management that Michelle and I started, learning about this concept of a holistic context. And it's actually something that we offer to our clients through our consulting services, either independently or through land design, typically just through land design. But sometimes people come to us asking us to provide workshops on this, or actually helping them to develop their own holistic context. And so if I just left you with holistic context, you'd have no concept of what this thing actually is. But it is probably one of the most important things that we can do as a society and as individuals within a society to actually change the course of humanity. And that's a huge claim. And so I better support that. A lot of us kind of go through life aimlessly. We don't really take the time to define what it is that we want in our life. And by want, I don't mean you want to have a snowmobile or a big truck or a big car or a garden. I'm not talking about specific individual elements that you might desire in your life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a much higher level understanding of what it is that you want in your life. And what the holistic context allows us to do is it allows us to define those needs and wants in terms of the values that we hold important within our life. And once you understand what those values and those quality of life statements are, so what sorts of things do you want in your life from a quality of life perspective? If we don't define those out when we're of clear mind, then we just kind of tackle the opportunities and the problems as they come towards us, aimlessly, essentially, or not aimlessly, but maybe more reactionary is a better word for that, or in a reactionary way. And so we're constantly kind of in a fight or flight scenario, saying yes or no to things as they come along. And if we're not being deliberate about what we say yes and no to, then we'll just end up where we're going. And it may not be where you want to go. So if you want to end up in a specific situation with specific quality of life, because really that's all that life is about. Life is about creating a certain quality around you. And in order to do that, you have to define out what those qualities actually are. And then once you have an understanding of those qualities, then you can start to make decisions toward or against it. And the irony is that a lot of times the difference between a well-lived life and a poorly lived life is a whole bunch of no's. And what I mean by that is saying no more often, basically. We tend to say yes too often, and we don't say no often enough. And sometimes we don't say no because we feel bad about saying no. We don't want to let somebody down. Or sometimes we don't say no because it seems like it might be a good opportunity, and so we should just do it. But when we actually take the time to understand what quality of life we want, then we can start to look at those opportunities, problems, additional resources, whatever it is that we're trying to sort out, in terms of whether or not it's going to propel us closer to the quality of life that we desire or take us further away from it. So you can imagine when we're working with a client in our consulting services, that we want to understand what types of what the quality of life for our clients actually needs to look like as a result of working on their particular property. And a lot of times people make the connection that in order to achieve a certain quality of life, they need to get a piece of property and they need to farm and they need to grow their own food and all of these things. And every person's a little different. So I'm not going to say that defines every one of our clients, but and so it's amazing that they get to that stage, because without a holistic context, they've made a few leaps there that are sometimes not always easy to make. But then once they get there, they make decisions that end up enslaving them in different ways. So whether it's debt, or whether it's getting too many animals initially, or whether it's making gardens that are too big for them to manage. And so they don't take the time to understand how their quality of life has to be as a result of the decisions that they make. So the first thing that we do with anybody, and so I'm talking about this through land, but you can do this on your own journey as well before you even buy land, is build a holistic context to see if the things that you're about to get into are actually going to stack and build the life that you want to live. And so again, I'll just speak about this through the land context because it's a little bit easier to understand. So if you have an opportunity, somebody's offering you some pigs and you've got the land base to handle it, instead of just going and saying, well, this is a great deal, I'm going to go buy some pigs, you look at it through your holistic context and try and understand if having those pigs is actually going to get you closer to the overall life quality of life that you're actually trying to seek. And if it is, then you go ahead and you buy them. And if it isn't, then you don't. And so one of the ways that the holistic context helps us to make this decision is, yeah, Jen says, making a holistic context is like having a fairy godmother beside you at all times. Pure magic. Totally. I totally agree with you, Jen. And so if you do end up saying no to this, once you've got a holistic context, the beautiful thing about it is that you know that if you look back on that decision and you wonder, oh man, did I make the right decision? You'll never have the regret, because you'll know that you took a process to get from A to B, and it was that process that helped you to get enough clarity to know that you were making the right choice. And so Michelle and I have actually started to document our decisions. Part of making the decisions includes testing the decision against seven high-level questions that ask you very, very hard. They're very hard questions to answer, but they're hard if you don't have a process. They're easy once you have a process. And so decisions that used to take Michelle and I 6 months to a year end up taking us 10 or 15 minutes to complete, because we have a systematic process to go through, which will address kind of the primary reasons to or not to do it. And you test it through these quality of life statements that you've got. And so it's very efficient. It avoids all the guilt. And so whether or not you get into permaculture, or whether or not you start your own business, or whether or not you change jobs, or decide to have another kid, or get a dog, or get animals for your farm, it doesn't matter how big or small, even like something as small as buying a Snickers bar, you could run through this context if you wanted to. So really, really big decisions and really, really small decisions can all work the same way. Because ultimately it's the decisions that you make every single day which determine where you end up going. So I highly recommend it. And you can't really get freedom if you don't have a way of making decisions. And that's why this quote is sitting in front of you guys right now. If one does not know which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. And the reason this is a really profound quote, if you've ever gone sailing, sailboats basically catch wind across the beam of the boat, and it depends on how your sails are oriented will depend on whether you're going downwind or crosswind or upwind. But essentially we use wind and we adjust our sails accordingly, and even sometimes our path, in order to get to a destination. And because sailboat generally does not motor very often, because it's designed to use wind energy to move it, we have to know how to trim our sails in order to ensure that we get to the right destination. Now on the planet, wind moves in circles. So if you ever look at a satellite map, you'll see wind rotating around in circles. So if you always kept one sail trim, then you would always end up moving your boat around in circles, and you'd never actually get to your destination. So once you know what your destination is, which is over here, and you're starting right here, as you move across that circular wind pattern, you have to change your sails and sometimes also your strategy. So you may not go like this, but you may go like this and like this. You'll still end up in the destination. It's not always necessarily a straight path, but it's usually the straightest path. So there's a difference there. You may need to tack a few ways in order to get to your destination, versus most people just get caught up in the circular windstorm and go around in circles. So we need to know which opportunities to say no to. And that's the same kind of analogy as what Seneca is saying here, is we have to know which winds not to harvest. And that means in the reality of life is that we have to know which opportunities are going to actually propel us towards our destination, and which ones are going to end up taking us in the wrong direction or spinning us in circles. So it's one of the most important things that we've done as a result of our journey towards where we're headed. And I highly recommend that you guys check this out. This is something that, like I said, we can help with, but it's also something that some of my colleagues do as well. So Dakota Cohen helps people with holistic management. Javin Bernakovich from All Points Design helps people with holistic management. And Javin does a bunch of other things as well in terms of, finding your true calling and, helping people through some pretty hard stuff. So that's kind of the niche that he's started helping people a lot with recently. It's something that we require our clients to go through if we're going to do a larger consultancy with them, though, because otherwise, if we don't understand what kind of quality of life they want, we'll just end up recommending a whole bunch of stuff that they may want, but it may not actually get them to where they want to go. It might just be a huge distraction. And one of my biggest concerns as a consultant is making false recommendations. And so when I'm actually looking at a person's property, I'm always kind of trying to find the intersection between where their quality of life is or needs to be, their property and their passions and resources. And that kind of all comes together in that initial diagnosis portion. So lots of opportunity kind of exists within this context space. So if you're looking for some free resources on holistic context and you want to just delve into it on your own, and I think it's totally doable to do this, if you type in Very Edible Gardens into Google space holistic context, I'll just put that into the chat window. You'll get, so there it is, Very Edible Gardens plus holistic context into the Google search console. You'll get a series of 3 blogs written by Very Edible Gardens, or Verge, who is run by Dan Palmer and Adam Grubb. And it basically takes you through a step-by-step process on how to build your own first holistic context. It's a wonderful set of articles. I highly, highly recommend reading it. And once you've got it, the next step is to actually start to use it. And so I've kind of covered this already, but the holistic context is usually 2 pages, maybe 3 pages of information that you put down based on how you build it. Typically, what we create our context on 1 page. That's just the context itself. It doesn't include the all the other tools that are kind of built into it. And then we use our testing questions in order to make decisions. And like I said, it's very efficient. It's easy. One place that it's really great is when you have multiple decision makers trying to make a decision. So if you're running a company and you've got 3 or 4 partners in the company, this can be a really successful tool. If you've got a farm where you've got a couple of different people managing the farm, this can be a really great tool. And even just between a husband and wife, it's a fantastic place to start for a husband and wife. You can repair marriages with this stuff, because all of a sudden both parties are taking the time to actually get into and understand what each other partner actually wants from a quality of life perspective. And so honestly, I can't recommend this enough. Our businesses both have their own holistic context. So Verge has a holistic context, Adaptive Habitat has a holistic context, and then Michelle and myself have holistic contexts as well that we share together. And so when we're making decisions for Verge, we use its context, and Adaptive, same thing. And then when we're making our own personal life decisions, we're using our context as well. It sounds complex, it sounds kind of all-encompassing, but it's a really great place. Yeah, I think, Vita, that your father, your husband and your son would really benefit from this. I mean, I don't know if they're struggling to make decisions, but when you're trying to row a boat together, it helps when you're rowing in unison. And this tool really facilitates that. So I highly recommend that article. Check that out. And then lastly, today I'm going to take a little bit of a slightly different tact from the context. Honestly, like, the holistic context is probably one of the last things you need to do if you're trying to work towards your freedom. And so you could probably stop this set of presentations right here. I'm going to move on to this concept of building a business for a couple of reasons. number one, if you have built the context and you want to work within the permaculture space or within a space that doesn't exist because there's just not a market for it, then you know, one of the ways to do that is to build a business. Now, I should just put a caveat on here. Not every person should start a business. Starting a business is really hard, and it forces a lot of internal happiness and strife at the same time sometimes. And so I think that entrepreneurism is sometimes made out to be easier than it is. And so I don't think that running your own business, running your own business is something that everybody should do. So I just want to put that caveat out there. But let's say that as a result of making your holistic context, you realize that you're in a situation, in a job, doing something that you don't like, okay? Doing something that doesn't meet your holistic context. And so as a result of making that context, you realize that you need to change your career. And that might mean taking on another job or seeking another job that kind of stacks more towards your passions, your values, your quality of life statements. But it could also mean that, you know, as a result of searching for that type of work, that you find that it doesn't exist. And so it might mean that you actually need to start a business. So let's just make the assumption that you're into this for a career change. This process that I'm going to talk about will work for either finding another job or building your own business. Or for folks that have a business like Vita, for example, who has a farm, you can use this same process for helping to refocus where you're putting your energy within your existing business. So it's actually a very universal approach that I highly recommend to a lot of the people that we talk to. So one of the most effective things that you can do like while you're in this investigatory phase is interview people. I've used this a lot in my career. And so the goal with interviewing people is to go out and seek the smartest people that you can in areas that interest you, that you think may contain opportunity towards, or that benefit or buttress from your existing skills, passions, and energy. So when I was, before I built Adaptive Habitat, I actually went out and interviewed a whole bunch of municipalities. I interviewed engineers, I interviewed planners, I interviewed bureaucrats, people within cities. And I wanted to understand where there were liabilities in the work that they did that nobody was tackling. And I talked to a lot of people. And what's really interesting about that is if you can ask the right questions and you can talk to the right people, there's really only two ways to build a business out there. And one is to come up with an idea, build it, and hope that people buy it, which is how most people do it. And then number two is to go and talk to people that hold problems. Okay, and what I mean by that are like people that, for example, in a city that deal with stormwater management issues. Okay, they hold the problem of stormwater management for a city. They can see opportunities that they can't get access to, and they also will know who is actually providing solutions to these problems that they have, or if nobody actually is solving these problems that they actually have. So if you have, you know, an idea on how to solve stormwater management that doesn't exist, or maybe they have an idea but there's no service provider to offer it, you can actually get these insights from these problem holders just by going and having a coffee with them or talking to them on the phone. And there's a really specific way on how to go about interviewing. And if that's something of interest to folks, we can have another video on that at some point, or we can talk about it. I usually go through this process quite extensively in our business coaching program that we offer once a year called Regenerative Business Mentorship that Javin and I offer. But we can talk about this at some point on YouTube as well, probably, just, you know, in a really brief way. But basically, when you go and interview these people and you ask them the right questions, they're going to give you enormous amounts of value, usually for free. And it's amazing. And it will give you all sorts of clues as to where your business potentially should be positioned, who your target market is, what problem you solve, what your niche is going to be, Because in talking to all of these different people, you're going to get an idea as to what interests you, because you can feel that emotionally when you're talking to them. Oh, I'm really interested in that problem that they're talking about. Now, let's say you don't want to start a business and you're just looking for a new job. Interviewing people is a great way to do it. So most of us do it the opposite way. What we do is we'll put a resume together and then we start cold emailing people saying, hey, I'm really interested in this job. Take a look at my email or my resume. The better way to do it is to be more proactive about it and go on to interview people yourself. It's like, hey, my name's, because Jen's text just came up there. My name's Jen. I'm really interested in urban agriculture. So she goes around and starts interviewing as many different towns and municipalities and cities as possible to understand what the barriers are between creating local food resilience through the use of urban agriculture. She just interviews a whole bunch of people. When she's trying to set the interview up, the email is really simple. It's like, hi, my name's Jen. I can't remember what your career is, Jen, but I'm just going to make something up. I'm a chemical engineer. I'm really interested in urban agriculture. You are definitely in a position that would have some insights around urban agriculture. I would love to talk to you for 20 minutes. I promise I have nothing to sell. And if that's interesting, here are 3 times that I'm available to talk with you. Make it really, really simple with them. You promise you have nothing to sell, and you make them out to be the hero, which they are, because they hold the problem. They're your hero. And so it almost always works. You'll almost always get an opportunity to talk to somebody. And then once you get there, you don't really talk about yourself. You talk about their problem. And if you've listened to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, what you realize is that the more questions you ask of people, the more they start to get curious about you, even though you're not talking about yourself. It's kind of an inverse kind of relationship there. And inevitably, the conversation will inevitably swing around to you, because they'll want to know more about you and why you're asking them all these hard questions about things that they've never even really, they've thought about, but they didn't think anybody else was thinking about. And then they'll realize that Jen has an incredible amount of resources when it comes to project management, because she's a chemical engineer. And I don't think that you're a chemical engineer, Jen. I can't remember what job you have, but just using that as an example. And then they're like, wow, so you've got all this experience in these other areas and you're interested in urban agriculture. He's like, and if there's an opportunity to bring somebody on board, that's usually when the conversation will come up. So even if you're just looking for another job, you can go out and find jobs using interviews that were never even posted because they just never were. Most jobs actually are created that never actually get posted in the first place. And so you can end up building your own job as long as you're not going out there and interviewing people and kind of trying to circumvent the process. And then, like, you can't lie to them. You can't tell them you're not going to sell either a product, service, or yourself, and then go and sell yourself. The goal is to actually go in and get real information to help you to make better decisions about what's next for you. So, right, architect, that's right. Anyways, so hopefully that makes sense. This is something that, like I said, you can use to change your career. You can use it to start a business. Once you've got a liability that you're interested in, you need to build a business model. And so there's a great book called Business Model Generator, which is kind of lays out how to build what's called a business model instead of a business plan. Highly recommend it. I don't have time to go through that today, but we could do that on a future video perhaps. And then my recommendation is always to try and build it as a side hustle first. See if you can't get some work on the side, if it's possible. Sometimes you just have to go straight into it. And if it's a job, you're probably going to go straight into it. But see if you can build it as a side hustle first to see if you can test the opportunity that exists for that particular idea, product, or service that you've got. And you'll know pretty quickly, usually within a year or two, whether or not there's going to be an opportunity for that. And at some point, you'll be forced to make a decision, usually to jump both feet into it or to try something else. So if it fails completely, well, at least you didn't, sell the whole house in order to get into it initially. And this kind of ties into some of the stuff that we've talked about in previous sessions. But if it does succeed and it does work, then you can jump in with both legs and make it full time. And so I just want to stress again, the goal here is not to tell everybody that they should go out and start businesses. That's not the goal at all. It's use a context, make a decision. We all have to make money. And so we can use our context to figure out whether or not ideas or opportunities that come our way are actually a good fit with regards to the quality of life statements that we've stated in our holistic context. Frankie Robertson asks, would you say that word of mouth works just as much? Absolutely. But again, the community that you're trying to get the word of mouth from needs to know that you're looking. So you need a way of communicating with them. Word of mouth absolutely works. But sometimes we're looking for jobs that don't exist, that there may not even be a job description for it. And because the person that knows that there is a gaping hole in that area within their business may not realize that there's somebody that actually can fulfill that role. And they may not have that insight until they've been interviewed by somebody or talked to somebody. So there's a whole process that I follow, and I'm running out of time today, and I wanted to leave some time for questions. So we will continue on with this model or this presentation, I think next week, and I'll make an announcement on my newsletter about it. So if you're on that, you'll find out about it. We've got 10-15 minutes to take some questions. So if you guys have any questions, that'd be great. I'm going to just scroll up through the comments here and see if there's any other comments that need to be addressed, and place your questions and comments into the bottom there. And as I'm just doing that, if you want, it'd be great to hit the like button and share this on social media if you haven't done so already. I'd really appreciate that. Okay, let's just go through these comments. So Alan says, erosion, sediment load, and pollutants in waterways. Beavers basically rejuvenate fisheries. Water storage is just the beginning. Absolutely. There's some great research out there on what beavers do. Okay. Oh, we got people from New York and from San Francisco and Cranbrook. Wow, awesome stuff, guys. Nick says, I have trouble determining what I want, still a work in progress. So Nick, it's more about what quality of life you want, not about the specific things in your life. And that's the thing with the holistic context, is it's super flexible. So you don't have to, your holistic context shouldn't be about, I want to live in Southern Alberta. It's about how your life has to be. So for me, like, I have quality of life statements. For example, I don't like being rushed. I don't like being stressed out. I need to live a healthy and sustainable life. I want my food to come from nutrient-dense sources. I want my children to grow up around nature. Things that kind of define out, because like your children can grow up around nature in Canmore as easily as they can grow up around nature in, a farm field sort of thing, or out in the middle of the prairie. And so there are a million possible ways to meet your holistic context. And so all you're doing by creating a decision-making framework is making sure that the decisions that you're saying yes to are going to stack into all of the quality of lives that you've made around finance, family, spirituality, community, health, ecology, all the different categories that are important in your life. And so when you're using a holistic context to do that, then we're only saying yes to the things that actually are going to stack in all of those categories as they pertain to quality of life, quality of life statements that are important to you. Okay. So I'm just going to go down here. We've got some new comments, I think. Frankie says, congrats on the award. Yeah, it's kind of unexpected. I've just been writing like a banshee. And so I guess there's just not a lot of people writing in that space. So that's great that, that they've noticed. Okay, seek to find. I didn't catch what you meant by a side hustle. Could you explain? Yeah, so a side hustle is basically something that you can do on the side. So when I was first working in the oil and gas industry, I really wanted to get into the renewable energy industry. And so I had a side hustle working for another mechanical engineer who was doing some renewable energy stuff. And so I would do all my work at night. So I'd work during the day for the oil and gas industry, and then at night I would go and work for this other engineer outside of the oil and gas industry. And it was a way for me to test the waters, if you will, before making the full leap. Frankie says, just the fact that, oh, just talking to Jen. Okay, Nick, that's helpful. I review your video a few times. Awesome. Okay, Frankie says, Rob, you're definitely raising the consciousness. I hope so. Keep my day job. Yeah, totally. So speaking of keeping my day job, folks, we've got a permaculture design course coming up here in June. We've still got spots in it. I'd love for you guys to make it up here and take the course. It's going to be fantastic. I'm really excited about it. We've got a whole slew of teachers that are going to be teaching. Given that it's in Calgary, we've got this great assortment of past students now that are just doing amazing work. And you're going to actually see them featured on our YouTube channel here in the coming weeks. So we're going to talk about what they do for a job, how they make a living using permaculture. And then you get an introduction to them as an instructor as well. So stay tuned for that. There's gonna be some great shows on food forestry, cold climate gardening, holistic livestock. So hopefully you guys catch that. If you're not on my newsletter, make sure you get onto it. I'll let you know what shows we're gonna be talking about in the future week. We will be going back to 3 times per week once things kind of settle down a little bit. So we're going to be kind of spotty for the next couple weeks here. Like I said at the beginning, this weekend, we're teaching in Invermere for 4 days. Then I'm off to BC on a consultancy for 3 days. And then the following week, we'll go back to a semi-normal schedule. So you can find out more about our newsletter at vergepermaculture.ca. If you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, then you're definitely going to get notifications as well. And we seem to be, nope, Gabby just asked a question here. So I'll answer Gabby's question, then we'll wrap up for the day. So came in late, not sure if you covered how one goes about developing a business plan. Any tools you'd suggest on what we could use to develop a draft for our future business? Absolutely. So Gabby, we talked about something called business model generation or business model generator. I'm just going to Google it right now. I won't be able to put the link in, but I'll at least tell you where. But yeah, so if you type in, if you go Google business model canvas, let's see if I can modify this URL enough so that you guys can understand what it is. Okay, so it's strategizer.com. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so you have to kind of interpret that URL there a little bit. Strategizer.com/canvas/business model canvas. You can get a book from Chapters or Amazon that describes how to fill that out. There's I think it's a free, if it's not free, it's really cheap app for iPad, which will allow you to build business model canvases quickly. Highly recommend that with regards to trying to figure out what your business model looks like, who your clientele is, what your sales price is going to be. It's a little bit more intuitive and flexible than building a business plan. So check it out, Business Model Generation, which is a book. And then there's also the canvas that they talk about in the book. Highly recommend it. Okay, folks. Well, thanks again so much. I hope you guys had a great lunch hour with me today. I've got a special announcement coming out later today on my newsletter. You're going to want to make sure you're on our newsletter to find out about it. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So get onto the newsletter and you'll find out about it later today or tomorrow. And I've got a really great new program starting up very, very soon. And I'm really excited about it. So get on the newsletter and you'll be notified. All right, folks, have an awesome day, and we'll talk to you guys all real soon.